The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, in the summer of 1882. And Ethan Walker noticed the woman sitting on the wooden steps of the general store because her shoulders were shaking with the kind of sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside. He had ridden into town an hour earlier, his chestnut mare tired from 3 days on the trail driving cattle from his family's ranch to the stockyards. All he wanted was a hot meal, a bath, and maybe a glass of whiskey before heading back home. But something about the woman's grief stopped him in his tracks, made him forget about his own exhaustion and the dust coating his throat. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with honey-colored hair that had escaped from its pins and hung in loose waves around her face. Her dress was simple calico, faded from washing but clean, and in her hands she clutched a letter that looked like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The paper was wrinkled, and even from several feet away, Ethan could see the ink stains where tears had fallen and smudged the carefully written words. He stood there for a moment, his hat in his hands, uncertain whether to approach or leave her to her private sorrow. His mother had raised him to be respectful, to give people their space when they needed it, but she had also raised him to offer help when someone was clearly hurting. After a few seconds of internal debate, he took a step forward, his boots making a soft sound on the wooden planks. The woman looked up, startled, and quickly tried to wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and deep, rimmed with red from crying. She attempted a smile, but it faltered almost immediately, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I did not mean to make a spectacle of myself." Ethan shook his head and moved closer, keeping a respectful distance. "No need to apologize, miss. We all have our moments. Are you all right? Is there something I can do to help?" She looked down at the letter in her hands, and her expression crumpled again. "No one can help. It is too late. It has always been too late." He waited, giving her time to compose herself if she wanted to explain or to tell him to mind his own business if she preferred. The street around them was relatively quiet at this hour, most people inside having supper or finishing up their daily work. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the sound of a piano being tuned drifted from the saloon 3 buildings down. After a long moment, the woman took a shaky breath. "My brother died 6 months ago. Consumption. He was only 19 years old." Her voice broke on the last words, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as if to hold back another sob. "I am very sorry for your loss," Ethan said quietly, meaning every word. He had lost his own father 2 years earlier to a fall from a horse, and he knew the particular ache that came with grief. "Thank you," she whispered. "His name was Tommy. He was my only sibling, and we were very close. Before he died, when he was so sick he could barely breathe, he asked me to do something for him. He asked me to write to a girl he had loved, a girl named Sarah Brennan who moved to Billings with her family 3 years ago. He wanted me to tell her that he had never stopped thinking about her, that she had been the brightest part of his life, and that he was sorry he never had the courage to tell her how he felt when she lived here." Ethan felt his chest tighten with sympathy. "And you wrote the letter?" She nodded, holding up the paper in her hand. "I wrote it the day after he died. I poured everything into it, all the things he had told me in those last days, all the love he had carried for her. I promised him I would send it, that I would make sure she knew, but I could not do it. I kept thinking about how she might have moved on, how she might be married or engaged to someone else, how this letter might bring her pain instead of comfort. And then days became weeks, and weeks became months, and now it has been 6 months and I still have not sent it. I failed him. I failed Tommy." The raw pain in her voice cut through Ethan like a knife. He understood now why she was crying, why she looked so utterly devastated. This was not just grief for her brother, it was guilt and regret and the weight of a promise unkept. "May I ask your name?" he said gently. She looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes. Catherine Mills. Miss Mills, I am Ethan Walker. I have a ranch about 15 miles from here," He paused, choosing his words carefully. I do not think you failed your brother. Grief does strange things to us. It makes us doubt ourselves, makes us afraid of causing more pain. But I think if your brother asked you to send that letter, it was because he believed Sarah deserved to know the truth. Maybe it will hurt her, or maybe it will bring her peace. But either way, it is what he wanted. Catherine looked down at the letter again, her fingers trembling. But how can I send it now? 6 months have passed. What will she think of me? What will she think of Tommy? An idea began to form in Ethan's mind, something impulsive and perhaps foolish, but something that felt right in a way he could not quite explain. Where in Billings does she live? Do you have an address? Catherine nodded slowly. Her family has a homestead on the eastern edge of town. Tommy got a letter from her about a year before she moved away, and he kept it. I found it in his things. The address is on the envelope. Billings is about 50 miles from here, Ethan said, thinking out loud, maybe a little more depending on the route. It is a 2-day ride if you push it, 3 if you take your time. Catherine looked at him, confusion mixing with the grief on her face. I do not understand what you are suggesting. Ethan surprised himself with what he said next. Let me deliver it for you. Let me ride to Billings and put that letter directly into Sarah Brennan's hands. That way you know it will reach her, that your promise to your brother will be kept. Her eyes widened. You would do that. But why? You do not know me. You do not know Tommy or Sarah. He did not have a good answer for her, at least not one that made logical sense. Maybe it was because he saw the genuine anguish in her face and wanted to ease it. Maybe it was because he understood what it meant to lose someone and to live with regrets. Or maybe it was because something about Catherine Mills, with her tear-stained cheeks and her honest grief, had touched something in his heart that had been dormant for a long time. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally, and because I can see how much this means to you. No one should have to carry this kind of weight alone. Catherine stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, weighing whether to trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. Then, slowly, she stood up from the steps, still clutching the letter. I do not know what to say. This is incredibly kind, but I could not ask you to ride 100 miles round trip for something that is my responsibility. You are not asking, I am offering. Ethan met her gaze steadily. Besides, I do not have anything pressing waiting for me. The cattle are sold, the hands can manage the ranch for a few days, and I could use a ride to clear my head. She bit her lip, and he could see her resolve wavering. If you truly mean it, I would be forever grateful, but please let me pay you for your time and trouble. Ethan shook his head. I do not want your money, Miss Mills, just your trust that I will see this through. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than despair. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. She held out the letter, and he took it carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. The paper was soft from being handled so much, and when he looked down at it, he could see the careful script, the words written with obvious care and emotion. He folded it gently and tucked it into the inside pocket of his vest, right over his heart. I will leave first thing in the morning, he said. Can you tell me anything else about Sarah Brennan, what she looks like, anything that might help me find her? Catherine thought for a moment. Tommy said she had red hair, very bright and curly. She would be about 21 now. Her father is a blacksmith, so they might be easy to find if you ask around. The homestead is called Brennan's Forge. Ethan nodded, committing the details to memory. I will find her. And when I do, I will tell her that this letter came from you, that you kept your promise to your brother. Will you come back through Silver Creek when you return? Catherine asked, and there was something in her voice, a tentative hope, that made his heart beat a little faster. I will, he promised. I will come back and tell you how it went. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face despite the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. I will be waiting, and Mr. Walker, thank you again, you are a good man. He felt heat rise in his cheeks at the compliment and ducked his head, settling his hat back on. Just doing what anyone decent would do. You take care of yourself, Miss Mills. Catherine, she corrected softly. Please call me Catherine. "Catherine," he repeated, liking the way her name sounded, "I will see you in a few days." He tipped his hat to her and turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Ethan." He looked back, and she was standing there with the late sunlight turning her hair to gold, her expression both vulnerable and hopeful. "Be safe, please." "I will," he said, and meant it. That night, Ethan stayed at the boarding house on the edge of town, but sleep did not come easily. He kept thinking about Catherine, about the grief in her eyes and the weight of guilt she had been carrying. He thought about her brother Thomas, a young man who had died with his heart full of unspoken love. And he thought about Sarah Brennan, who had no idea that somewhere in the world, someone had loved her enough to spend his dying breaths thinking of her. When dawn broke over the Montana territory, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan was already awake and preparing for the journey. He checked his mare's shoes, filled his canteen and saddlebags with supplies, and made sure the letter was secure in his pocket. As he swung into the saddle and turned his horse toward the east, toward Billings and whatever awaited him there, he caught a glimpse of someone standing in the window of the general store above the main shop. It was Catherine, watching him leave. Even from a distance, he could see her raise her hand in a small wave. He returned the gesture, then urged his mare forward, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats marking the beginning of his journey. The Montana territory in summer was a study in contrasts. The morning started cool and fresh, the air crisp enough to see your breath, but by midday the sun beat down with relentless heat that made the horizon shimmer and dance. Ethan kept to the established trails when he could, following the route that wound through open grassland, past scattered homesteads, and along the banks of the Yellowstone River. He made good time that first day, stopping only to water his horse and eat some of the jerky and hardtack he had packed. As he rode, his mind kept drifting back to Catherine. There was something about her that had gotten under his skin, something more than just sympathy for her situation. He found himself remembering the way her eyes had looked in the fading sunlight, the way her voice had trembled with emotion, the strength it must have taken for her to sit on those steps and finally face the letter she had been too afraid to send. Ethan had not thought much about romance or love in the past few years. After his father died, he had thrown himself into running the ranch, into being the man his family needed him to be. There had been women here and there, a few dances at social gatherings, some polite conversation at church, but nothing that had sparked anything real inside him. His mother sometimes worried that he was too solitary, too focused on work, but he had always told her he was content with his life. Now, riding across the Montana plains with a dead man's love letter in his pocket, he was not so sure anymore. He camped that night beside a creek, building a small fire and letting his horse graze on the sweet grass that grew along the water's edge. The stars overhead were brilliant, countless points of light scattered across the vast darkness of the sky. He lay on his bedroll and stared up at them, wondering what Catherine was doing right now, whether she was thinking about him and the promise he had made. The second day brought him closer to Billings. The landscape began to change subtly, more homesteads appearing, more signs of human settlement. He passed a freight wagon heading in the opposite direction, the driver giving him a friendly wave. He saw a family working in their fields, children playing near a small cabin while their parents tended to crops. By late afternoon, the town of Billings came into view. It was larger than Silver Creek, with more buildings and more people moving through the streets. Ethan could see the church steeple rising above the other structures, and beyond that, the open plains stretched out toward the distant mountains. He rode down the main street slowly, drawing a few curious glances from townspeople but nothing more. At the first hitching post, he dismounted and approached a man who was loading supplies into a wagon. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan said politely. "I am looking for a place called Brennan's Forge. Do you know where I might find it?" The man, middle-aged with a weathered face and kind eyes, nodded immediately. "Sure do. You head east out of town about 2 miles. You will see a sign marking the turnoff. Cannot miss it. Old Brennan is the best blacksmith in these parts. Much obliged, Ethan said, tipping his hat. You need some work done? The man asked conversationally. No, sir, just delivering a message. The man nodded and went back to his loading, and Ethan remounted his horse. His heart was beating faster now, knowing that he was close to completing his mission. He followed the directions, riding east out of Billings until he saw the sign the man had mentioned. A simple wooden marker with Brennan's Forge painted in black letters and an arrow pointing down a dirt road. The homestead itself was modest but well-maintained. A large barn stood next to a workshop where Ethan could hear the ring of hammer on anvil. A house with a front porch and flower boxes in the windows sat nearby, and chickens scratched in the yard. Smoke rose from the workshop's chimney, and as Ethan approached, a man emerged, wiping his hands on a leather apron. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with red hair going gray at the temples and a beard that covered most of his face. His arms were thick with muscle from years of working metal, and he regarded Ethan with the cautious but not unfriendly look of someone used to strangers seeking his services. "Help you?" he called out. Ethan dismounted and walked forward, leading his horse. "Mr. Brennan." "My name is Ethan Walker. I have come from Silver Creek with a message for Miss Sarah Brennan." The man's expression shifted, curiosity and a hint of concern crossing his features. "Sarah is my daughter. What kind of message?" "It is a personal matter, sir." "A letter from someone who knew her before you moved here. I promised I would deliver it into her hands directly." Mr. Brennan studied him for a long moment, and Ethan could see him weighing whether to trust this stranger. Finally, he nodded. "Sarah is inside helping her mother with supper." "I will fetch her, but I will be watching, stranger. If you mean any harm to my girl, you will answer to me." "I understand, sir, and I respect that. I mean no harm. I am just keeping a promise." Mr. Brennan grunted and walked toward the house. Ethan waited, his hand resting on the letter in his pocket. A few minutes later, the door opened and a young woman stepped out onto the porch. Sarah Brennan was exactly as Catherine had described her. She had bright red hair that curled in wild spirals around her face, fair skin dusted with freckles, and green eyes that looked at him with open curiosity. She was pretty in an unaffected way, wearing a simple work dress with an apron tied around her waist. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, coming down the steps. Her father remained on the porch, arms crossed, watching. Ethan removed his hat and held it respectfully. "Miss Brennan, my name is Ethan Walker. I have ridden from Silver Creek to bring you something. About 6 months ago, a young man named Thomas Mills died of consumption. Before he passed, he asked his sister to write you a letter to tell you things he never had the chance to say when you lived there. His sister wrote that letter, but she struggled with whether to send it. Today I met her and offered to deliver it myself to make sure you received it." Sarah's face had gone pale and she reached out to grip the porch railing. Tommy Mills died." "Yes, miss, I am very sorry." Tears immediately sprang to her eyes and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh no." "Oh, poor Tommy, he was such a sweet boy." She looked at Ethan with anguish written across her face. "I should have written to him more after we moved. I did at first, but then life got busy and I stopped. I thought about him sometimes, wondered how he was doing, but I never imagined." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter, holding it out to her. "He wanted you to know that you meant a great deal to him. His sister, Catherine, put all of his feelings into this letter. I think he would want you to have it, even if it comes later than planned." Sarah took the letter with trembling hands, staring down at it as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you for bringing this. Thank you for riding all this way. It means more than you know." "If you want to read it in private, I can wait out here," Ethan offered. She shook her head. "No, it is all right. I am going to go inside. But please, you must be exhausted from your journey. Will you stay for supper?" "It is the least we can offer after you came all this way." Ethan glanced at Mr. Brennan, who had relaxed his stance somewhat and now nodded in agreement. "The girl is right. You are welcome to share our meal and rest your horse." "I would be grateful," Ethan admitted. He was tired, and the prospect of a home-cooked meal and some friendly company was appealing. Sarah disappeared into the house, clutching the letter to her chest. Mr. Brennan came down from the porch and extended his hand. "Patrick Brennan, that was a decent thing you did, riding all this way for a girl you never met." Ethan shook his hand firmly. It seemed like the right thing to do. Catherine, Miss Mills, was carrying a heavy burden. "I wanted to help ease it." Patrick nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you have done a good deed today. Come on, let us get your horse settled and then we will go inside. My wife will want to thank you herself." They led Ethan's mare to the barn, where Patrick showed him where to unsaddle her and where the water trough and hay were located. As they worked, Patrick talked about the homestead, about the blacksmithing business, about how life in Billings had been good to his family. Ethan listened, offering occasional comments, but part of his mind was still back in Silver Creek, wondering what Catherine was doing, whether she was thinking about him. Inside the house, the smell of cooking food filled the air, making Ethan's stomach growl. The interior was cozy and well lived in, with handmade furniture and personal touches that spoke of a family that cared for their home. A woman with red hair like Sarah's, though streaked with more gray, turned from the stove and smiled warmly at him. "You must be Mr. Walker. I am Moira Brennan. Thank you for what you have done for our Sarah." "It was my pleasure, ma'am," Ethan said. Sarah was sitting at the table, the letter spread out in front of her, tears still streaming down her face, but her expression one of wonder rather than just grief. She looked up when Ethan and her father entered. "He loved me," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "I had no idea. When we were young, we were friends, but I never knew he felt this way, and his sister wrote it all so beautifully. She told me about his last days, about how he spoke of me, about how much I meant to him." She wiped at her eyes. "I wish I had known. I wish I could have told him that I cared for him too, that those summers when we were young were some of the happiest times of my life." Moira moved to her daughter's side and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You could not have known, sweetheart, but at least now you do. At least now you can carry that knowledge with you." Sarah nodded and carefully folded the letter, holding it close. "I will treasure this always. And I want to write back to Catherine, to thank her and to tell her about Tommy, about the boy I remember. Do you think she would want that, Mr. Walker?" "I think she would very much appreciate it," Ethan said. "It might bring her comfort to know that, Sarah, that you remember her brother with fondness." They sat down to supper shortly after, a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden. The conversation flowed easily, and Ethan found himself enjoying the Brennan family's company. They were good people, warm and welcoming, and they treated him like an honored guest rather than a stranger. After the meal, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah handed Ethan a sealed envelope. "I have written a letter to Catherine. It is not much, but I wanted her to know how grateful I am, and I wanted to share some memories of Tommy with her." "Will you take it back to her?" "Of course," Ethan said, tucking the envelope into his pocket next to where Tommy's letter had been. The symmetry of it felt right somehow, like completing a circle. Patrick insisted that Ethan stay the night, offering him a bed in the small guest room they kept for travelers. Ethan accepted gratefully, and after bidding the family good night, he lay in the comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the journey ahead. Tomorrow he would ride back to Silver Creek. Tomorrow he would see Catherine again. The thought made him smile in the darkness. He left the Brennan homestead at dawn, with a pack of food that Moira had pressed into his hands and the family's repeated thanks ringing in his ears. The ride back felt different somehow, lighter despite the fact that he was covering the same grueling distance. He pushed a little harder, camping only one night instead of two, driven by an eagerness he did not fully understand but did not question. When Silver Creek came into view on the afternoon of the third day, Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The town looked the same as when he had left it, but somehow it felt different, more significant. He rode straight to the general store, hoping to find Catherine there. She was not on the steps where he had first seen her, But as he dismounted, the door of the store opened and she emerged, as if she had been watching for him. Her face lit up with a smile that took his breath away, and she hurried down the steps toward him. "You are back," she said, and there was such relief and joy in her voice that it warmed him to his core. "I have been watching for you every day. Did you find her? Did you deliver the letter?" "I did," Ethan confirmed, pulling Sarah's letter from his pocket. "And she asked me to give you this." Catherine took the envelope with shaking hands, staring down at it with wide eyes. "She wrote back," she did. "She wanted you to know how much the letter meant to her, and she wanted to share some memories of your brother with you." Catherine looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness. "Thank you, Ethan. Thank you so much. You have given me a gift I can never repay." "You do not need to repay it," he said softly. "Seeing you smile like that is payment enough." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and Ethan felt something shift between them, something that had been building since the moment he first saw her crying on those steps. He wanted to say something, to tell her that she had been on his mind the entire journey, that the thought of seeing her again had driven him to ride faster and harder than he normally would have. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by uncertainty and the fear of presuming too much. Catherine seemed to sense his struggle because she reached out and gently touched his arm. "Will you walk with me? I want to read this letter, but I would like you to be there when I do, if that is all right." "I would be honored," he said. They walked to the edge of town, to a small grove of cottonwood trees that provided shade and privacy. Catherine sat down on a fallen log, and Ethan stood nearby, giving her space but staying close enough that she knew he was there. She opened the envelope with careful fingers and began to read. He watched her face as she read, saw the emotions play across her features: sadness, joy, laughter, tears. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest, much like Sarah had done with Tommy's letter. "She remembered him as kind and funny," Catherine said softly. "She told me about the summer when they were 15, how they used to sneak down to the creek after their chores were done and skip stones across the water. How Tommy once carved her name into a tree, and she pretended to be scandalized but secretly loved it. How he made her laugh even on her worst days." She looked at Ethan with shining eyes. "She said he must have been a wonderful brother and that I was lucky to have had him in my life for as long as I did. She is right. I was lucky." "You were," Ethan agreed. "And he was lucky to have a sister like you, one who cared enough to keep his promise even when it was hard." Catherine stood up and moved closer to him, so close that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "Ethan, these past few days waiting for you to return, I have thought about a lot of things. About grief and promises and the way life can change in an instant. But mostly I thought about you. About this stranger who appeared out of nowhere and did something incredibly kind without expecting anything in return. I kept wondering why you did it, and I realized it does not matter why. What matters is that you did." His heart was pounding now, and he could barely breathe. "Catherine, She reached up and placed her fingers gently against his lips, silencing him. "Let me finish. I do not know if you feel what I think I feel, but I need to say this. In the 3 days you were gone, I missed you. I missed someone I had only spoken to for a few minutes, which seems impossible, but it is true. And when I saw you ride back into town today, I felt happier than I have felt in months. So I am going to be brave, the way I should have been brave for Tommy, and I am going to tell you that I would very much like to get to know you better, if you are interested." Ethan caught her hand and held it gently in his own. "I am more than interested. Catherine, I thought about you every mile of that journey. You were the first thing on my mind when I woke up and the last thing I thought about before I fell asleep. I have never believed in fate or destiny, but meeting you felt like something I was meant to do." Her smile was radiant. "So what do we do now?" "Now," he said, his own smile matching hers, "I would like to court you properly if you will have me. I would like to take you to dinner, to spend time with you, to learn everything there is to know about Catherine Mills." "I would like that very much," she whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not. Instead, she rose up on her toes to meet him, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. The world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them in that grove of cottonwood trees. Two people who had found each other in the midst of grief and turned it into something beautiful. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Catherine laughed, a sound of pure joy, and Ethan felt something in his chest that had been locked away for years finally open up. "I have to warn you," Catherine said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I am not an easy woman. I have opinions and I speak my mind, and I do not suffer fools gladly." "Good," Ethan said. "I would not want you any other way." They walked back into town together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When they reached the general store, Catherine's employer, an older woman named Mrs. Henderson, was standing in the doorway with a knowing smile on her face. "So the cowboy came back," she said to Catherine. "I thought he might." Catherine blushed but did not let go of Ethan's hand. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Ethan Walker. Ethan, this is my employer and friend, Mrs. Henderson." "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," Ethan said politely. Mrs. Henderson looked him up and down appraisingly. "You seem like a decent sort. Catherine here is like a daughter to me, so you treat her right, you hear?" "I intend to, ma'am," Ethan promised. "Good. Now, Catherine, why do not you take the rest of the day off? I think you have earned it." Catherine looked surprised and grateful. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Go on, spend some time with your young man. Lord knows you deserve some happiness." They spent the rest of that afternoon and evening together, talking and walking through Silver Creek. Ethan told her about his ranch, about his family, about the life he had built in the Montana Territory. Catherine told him about growing up with Tommy, about their parents who had died when she was 18, about how she had taken a job at the general store to support herself and her brother when he got sick. "I felt so helpless watching him waste away," she confessed as they sat on a bench outside the church, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "The doctor said there was nothing to be done, that consumption just had to run its course. I did everything I could to make him comfortable, but it was never enough. And then, at the end, when he asked me about Sarah, I could see how important it was to him. I could see that he needed to know she would understand how he felt. And now she does," Ethan said, taking her hand in his. "You kept your promise, Catherine, maybe not in the way you originally planned, but you kept it." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for helping me do that. Thank you for giving me the courage I needed." "You had the courage all along," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you of it." They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, and Ethan marveled at how easy it felt, how right. He had known this woman for less than a week, and yet it felt like he had known her forever. "Will you stay in town for a while?" Catherine asked. "Or do you need to get back to your ranch?" "I should check in tomorrow," Ethan admitted. "Make sure everything is running smoothly, but I will come back as often as I can, and maybe, if you are willing, you could come visit the ranch sometime, meet my family." "I would like that," Catherine said. "I would like that very much." He walked her back to the boarding house where she rented a room, and they stood outside in the moonlight, neither wanting to say goodbye. "I will see you tomorrow before I leave," Ethan promised. "And I will be back in a few days." "I will be counting the hours," Catherine said softly, and then she kissed him goodnight, a lingering kiss that left him dizzy and wanting more. He watched her go inside, then walked to his own lodging with a lightness in his step that he had not felt in years. Life, he thought, had a funny way of surprising you when you least expected it. True to his word, Ethan came back to Silver Creek 3 days later, and then 3 days after that, and then again and again throughout the summer and into the fall. Each visit brought them closer together, deepening the connection that had sparked that first day when he found her crying over an unsent letter. They talked about everything, their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets, their views on life and love, and what they wanted from the future. Catherine visited the ranch in late August, and Ethan's mother, Margaret, fell in love with her immediately. His 2 younger sisters, Emily and Rachel, were equally charmed, and by the end of the visit, they were already planning a wedding even though Ethan had not yet officially proposed. "She is perfect for you," Margaret told her son as they stood on the porch watching Catherine help his sisters gather eggs from the chicken coop. "I have never seen you smile so much. She makes you happy." "She does," Ethan agreed. "She makes me feel alive in a way I have not felt since before Father died." "Then do not let her go," his mother advised. "Life is too short to waste time when you know you have found the right person." Ethan knew she was right. He had known from almost the beginning that Catherine was special, that what they had was rare and precious. But he wanted to do things properly, to court her the way she deserved, to build a foundation of trust and understanding before he asked her to commit her life to his. It was October when he finally asked her. The leaves on the cottonwood trees had turned gold and were falling like rain whenever the wind blew. He took her back to the grove where they had shared their first kiss, and there, under the canopy of autumn colors, he got down on one knee and pulled out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Catherine Mills," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous pounding of his heart, "you came into my life when I least expected it, and you changed everything. You made me believe in love again, in the possibility of building something beautiful with another person. I love you more than I have words to express, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Catherine's face, but she was smiling, that brilliant smile that lit up her whole face. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and then he stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and love he felt. They held each other for a long time, laughing and crying and making plans for their future. They were married in early November in the small church in Silver Creek. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and even the Brennan family made the trip from Billings to attend. Sarah Brennan, who had become a good friend to Catherine through their letters, stood up as one of her bridesmaids, a living symbol of the journey that had brought Ethan and Catherine together. During the reception, as Ethan and Catherine danced their first dance as husband and wife, Sarah approached them with tears in her eyes. "I want to thank you both," she said. "Tommy's letter changed my life. It made me realize that we should never leave things unsaid, never assume we have more time than we do. Because of that, I have been braver in my own life. I have told people I love them. I have taken chances I might not have taken before. And seeing you two together, seeing the happiness you have found, it gives me hope that I will find that for myself someday." Catherine embraced Sarah tightly. "You will find it, I know you will. And Tommy would be so happy knowing that his words made a difference." As the celebration continued around them, Ethan pulled Catherine close and whispered in her ear, "Are you happy?" She looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes that he had fallen in love with, and her smile was answer enough. "I am happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me hope when I had lost it. You showed me that even in the midst of grief, there can be joy. I love you, Ethan Walker." "I love you too, Catherine Walker," he said, savoring the sound of her new name. "And I promise to spend every day of our lives making sure you never regret this decision." They moved into the ranch house after the wedding, and Catherine adapted to ranch life with a grace and determination that impressed everyone. She was not afraid of hard work, and she threw herself into learning everything she could about managing a homestead. She helped Margaret with the household duties, learned to ride better so she could help move cattle, and even learned to treat minor injuries and illnesses in the livestock. But she also brought her own touches to the ranch, planting a garden that would bloom in the spring, organizing the house in ways that made it more efficient, and bringing a warmth and laughter to the place that had been missing since Ethan's father had died. His sisters adored her, often seeking her advice on everything from sewing to matters of the heart, and Margaret treated her like the daughter she had always wanted. The winter passed in a blur of cozy evenings by the fire, morning rides through snow-covered fields, and quiet moments of intimacy that deepened their bond. They talked about their future, about the children they hoped to have, about the legacy they wanted to build on this land. Spring arrived with its usual rush of new life and new work. Calves were born, fields were plowed and planted, and the ranch hummed with activity from dawn to dusk. Catherine was in her element, working alongside the ranch hands and proving herself to be every bit as capable as any of them. It was in May when she first suspected she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be sure before telling Ethan, choosing a quiet evening when they were alone in their room. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots after a long day when she came and stood in front of him, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Ethan, I have something to tell you," she said, and something in her tone made him look up sharply, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Are you all right?" She smiled, and her whole face glowed with a happiness that took his breath away. "I am more than all right. Ethan, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. Then suddenly he was on his feet, his arms around her, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." She laughed, dizzy from the spinning and from the sheer joy of sharing this news with him. "Yes, a baby. In late December or early January, the doctor thinks." He set her down carefully, his hands cupping her face, his eyes shining with tears. "Catherine, this is the best news you could have given me. I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer clearly in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you so much. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." The news spread through the ranch and then through Silver Creek like wildfire. Everyone was excited for the young couple, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and promises to help when the time came. Margaret was beside herself with joy at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, and Emily and Rachel immediately began planning how they would spoil their new niece or nephew. Catherine wrote to Sarah, sharing the news, and received a warm, congratulatory letter in return. Sarah had met a young man herself, the son of a rancher near Billings, and she wrote about how Catherine and Ethan's love story had inspired her to be open to the possibility of love in her own life. The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine suffered from nausea in the early months that left her exhausted and unable to keep much food down. Ethan was attentive and worried, doing everything he could to make her comfortable, but there was little that could be done except wait for that phase to pass. By summer, the nausea had subsided, but the heat made her uncomfortable and swollen. She tried to keep working, but Ethan and Margaret finally convinced her to take it easier, to rest more and let others handle the heavier tasks. It was hard for her, being someone who prided herself on her independence and capability, but she knew they were right. Autumn brought relief from the heat, and Catherine blossomed in the cooler weather. Her belly grew round and prominent, and she would often sit on the porch in the evenings with her hands resting on it, feeling the baby move inside her. Ethan loved those moments, sitting beside her with his own hand on her belly, feeling the kicks and tumbles of their child. "Do you think it is a boy or a girl?" he asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I do not know," Catherine said, "but I hope the baby is healthy. That is all that matters." "It will be," Ethan said with a confidence he did not entirely feel. Childbirth was dangerous, and many women and babies died in the process. The thought terrified him, but he tried not to let Catherine see his fear. She needed him to be strong, to believe that everything would be all right. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. By December, the ranch was blanketed in white, and the cold was bitter and unforgiving. Catherine's due date came and went with no sign of the baby, and she grew increasingly uncomfortable, her back aching and her sleep disturbed. Finally, on a frigid night in early January of 1884, her labor began. Ethan sent one of the ranch hands racing through the snow to fetch the doctor, while Margaret and Emily stayed with Catherine, helping her through the contractions and offering words of encouragement. The labor, was long and difficult. Catherine was strong, but the pain was intense, and there were moments when Ethan, pacing outside the bedroom door, thought he might lose his mind with worry. He could hear her cries, hear the murmured voices of his mother and the doctor, and he felt utterly helpless. It was dawn when the baby finally came, and the sound of a newborn's cry was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever heard. The bedroom door opened and his mother emerged, tears streaming down her face but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A beautiful, healthy son. And Catherine is tired, but she is all right. She is going to be all right." Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. "Can I see them?" "Of course, go on in." He entered the bedroom to find Catherine propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, with a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets cradled in her arms. She looked up when he came in, and her smile was everything. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Ethan approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in her arms. He was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on the world around him. Ethan felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly knocked him over. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect. We need to name him," Catherine said. "I have been thinking about it, and I would like to name him Thomas after my brother, if that is all right with you." Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thomas Walker. I think it is a perfect name." Tommy would be honored. They named him Thomas Ethan Walker, and he became the light of their lives. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's gray eyes and his father's determined chin. Ethan was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about the ranch even when Thomas was far too young to understand. Catherine recovered well from the birth, though it took time for her strength to fully return. She threw herself into motherhood with the same passion and determination she brought to everything else, and she was a natural at it. She sang to Thomas, told him stories, and showed him a world full of wonder and possibility. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, and Ethan's reputation as a fair and honest rancher grew throughout the Montana Territory. He expanded the herd, bought more land, and hired more hands to help with the work. Catherine continued to be his partner in every sense of the word, offering advice on business decisions and keeping the household running smoothly even as their family grew. In the spring of 1886, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She had her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's smile, and from the moment she arrived, she had Thomas wrapped around her little finger. He was 2 years old and took his role as big brother very seriously, always wanting to help take care of the baby. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1887, and while the loss was felt deeply by the entire family, there was comfort in knowing that she had lived to see her grandchildren, and to know that the ranch she and her husband had built was in good hands. Emily and Rachel both married within the next few years, and while they moved to their own homesteads with their husbands, they remained close to Ethan and Catherine, visiting often and bringing their own children to play with Thomas and Grace. In 1889, Catherine gave birth to their third child, another son they named Patrick after Sarah Brennan's father, who had become a good friend to Ethan over the years. The Brennans and the Walkers visited each other regularly, and Sarah, who had married her rancher and had children of her own, often spoke of how grateful she was for the letter that had changed her life and led to so many unexpected blessings. As the years turned into decades, Ethan and Catherine built a life that was everything they had dreamed of and more. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, and when Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Ethan was proud to be part of that new chapter in history. But through all the success, all the growth and change, what mattered most to both of them was each other and the family they had created together. They never forgot the way they had come together, never forgot the letter that had started it all. Catherine kept Sarah's letter, along with the original letter she had written for Tommy, in a wooden box in their bedroom. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would take them out and read them, remembering her brother and the love he had carried with him to his grave. But those moments of sadness were always tempered by gratitude for what had come from that grief, for the man who had seen her crying and had cared enough to help. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Ethan surprised Catherine by taking her back to the grove of cottonwood trees where they had shared their first kiss and where he had proposed. The trees had grown taller over the years, their branches thick and strong, but the place still held the same magic it had held all those years ago. "I wanted to bring you back here," Ethan said as they stood hand in hand in the dappled sunlight, "to tell you that I would do it all again. I would ride 100 miles, 1,000 miles, if it meant finding you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Walker, and I love you more today than I did the day we married." Catherine, now in her 40s but still as beautiful to him as she had been at 23, looked up at him with tears shining in her eyes. "You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought I had lost everything. You showed me that love can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the hardest moments in life lead us exactly where we are meant to be. I love you, Ethan. I will always love you." They kissed under the cottonwood trees, the same trees that had witnessed the beginning of their love story, and it felt like coming full circle. Their children grew into fine adults. Thomas, serious and responsible, took over more and more of the ranch operations as Ethan got older, proving himself to be a natural leader and a skilled cattleman. Grace, spirited and independent, married a doctor and moved to Helena, though she visited the ranch often and always brought her own growing family with her. Patrick, the youngest, had his mother's compassionate heart and became a teacher, dedicating his life to educating the children of Montana's frontier towns. As Ethan and Catherine entered their 60s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, content to let Thomas and his wife take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the quiet pleasures of a life well lived. They spent their days in each other's company, taking slow walks around the property, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and talking about all the memories they had made together. Sarah Brennan, now Sarah Mitchell, remained a close friend throughout the years. Her own children had grown and given her grandchildren, and when she and Catherine got together, they would often talk about Tommy and the letter that had brought them into each other's lives. Sarah had kept Tommy's letter too, and she told Catherine that she had shared it with her children when they were old enough to understand, wanting them to know about the boy who had loved their mother and whose love had sparked such unexpected connections. "Tommy would be so proud of you," Sarah told Catherine during one of their visits. "He would be proud of the life you have built, of the family you have raised, and of the love you found. I like to think he had a hand in bringing you and Ethan together, that somehow he knew what you needed." Catherine smiled at the thought. "Maybe he did. I would like to believe that. I would like to believe that even in death his love was still capable of creating something beautiful." In the spring of 1918, Catherine fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts and Ethan's devoted care, she grew weaker with each passing day. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch, knowing that the end was near, wanting to be there to say goodbye. Ethan never left her side. He held her hand, stroked her hair, and told her all the things he had told her 1,000 times before but needed to say once more. He told her she was the love of his life, his partner, his everything. He thanked her for the years they had shared, for the children they had raised, for every moment of joy and sorrow they had experienced together. Catherine, weak but still clear-minded, looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes that had captivated him from the first moment. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Promise me you will not grieve too long. Promise me you will remember the joy, not just the sadness. And promise me that when it is your time, you will find me again, wherever souls go when they leave this world." "I promise," Ethan said, tears streaming down his face. "I will find you, Catherine, I will always find you." She smiled, a soft and peaceful smile, and then she closed her eyes for the last time. Ethan held her as she slipped away, his heart breaking even as he knew she was finally at peace, finally reunited with her brother and all the loved ones who had gone before. The funeral was held on a beautiful spring day, the kind of day Catherine had always loved. The whole community turned out to pay their respects, and the stories people shared about her painted a picture of a woman who had been kind, strong, loving, and deeply loved in return. Sarah and her family made the journey from Billings, and Sarah embraced Ethan for a long time, both of them crying for the friend and the woman who had meant so much to them. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking of his mother's courage, her compassion, and her unwavering love for her family. He told the story of how his parents had met, of the letter and the cowboy who had ridden 50 miles to deliver it, and how that act of kindness had sparked a love that had lasted a lifetime. There was not a dry eye in the church when he finished. Ethan lived for another 5 years after Catherine's death, and while he honored his promise not to grieve too long, there was a part of him that had gone with her. He spent his days surrounded by his children and grandchildren, watching them build their own lives and families, and he found comfort in knowing that the legacy he and Catherine had created would continue long after they were gone. He often visited Catherine's grave, which was in a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. He would sit beside her headstone and talk to her, telling her about what was happening with their family, reminiscing about their life together, and counting down the days until he could see her again. On a warm summer evening in 1923, Ethan sat on the porch of the ranch house, the same porch where he had spent countless hours with Catherine over the years. Thomas was beside him, and they were watching the grandchildren play in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Do you miss her?" Thomas asked quietly. "Every day," Ethan admitted, "but I also feel grateful for every moment we had together. Your mother was an extraordinary woman, and I was blessed to have her in my life for as long as I did." "You were good together," Thomas said. "Growing up, watching the two of you, I always knew what real love looked like. You set the standard for all of us." Ethan smiled. "Your mother did most of the work. I just tried to keep up with her." They sat in companionable silence for a while, and then Ethan felt a strange sensation, a lightness in his chest. He looked out at the horizon, at the land he had worked for so many years, and he felt a profound sense of peace. "Thomas," he said softly, "take care of this place. Take care of your brother and sister, your children, all of them. This ranch, this family, it is the best thing your mother and I ever built." "I will, Pa," Thomas promised, and something in Ethan's tone made him look at his father more closely. "Pa, are you all right?" Ethan smiled, and it was a smile of pure joy. "I am better than all right. I think it is time for me to go find your mother. She has been waiting long enough." Before Thomas could respond, Ethan closed his eyes and took one last peaceful breath. When Thomas checked, his father was gone, his face relaxed and content as if he had simply fallen asleep. They buried Ethan next to Catherine, their headstones side by side, just as they had been in life. The inscription on Catherine's read, "Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She taught us how to love." The inscription on Ethan's read, "Devoted husband, father, and rancher. He rode 50 miles for love and never looked back." The story of how Ethan and Catherine met became a family legend passed down from generation to generation. Their grandchildren told their children, who told their children, and the tale of the cowboy who delivered an unsent letter and found love in the process became a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the unexpected ways that fate brings people together. The ranch remained in the Walker family for generations, a thriving legacy of everything Ethan and Catherine had built together. The grove of cottonwood trees where they had shared their first kiss became a special place for the family, a spot where proposals happened and anniversaries were celebrated, a living reminder of where it all began. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this world, Ethan and Catherine were together again. Their love as strong and true as it had been on that summer day in 1882, when a cowboy caught a woman crying over an unsent letter and decided to ride 50 miles to deliver it himself. Their story had come full circle, from grief to joy, from loss to love, from two strangers to one united heart that would beat together for all eternity. The letter that started it all, both Tommy's original letter and Sarah's response, were preserved by the family and eventually donated to the Montana Historical Society, where they remained as a testament to the enduring power of love and the ripples one act of kindness can create across a lifetime and beyond. Visitors to the museum would read the faded ink and hear the story of the Mills siblings and the Brennan girl, of the cowboy and the woman he loved, and they would walk away believing, perhaps for the first time, that true love really does exist. In the end, that was the greatest legacy Ethan and Catherine Walker left behind. Not just the ranch or the family or the stories, but the proof that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that grief can transform into joy, and that sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to ride 50 miles to deliver a letter to change the course of countless lives forever. Their love story lived on, told around dinner tables and campfires, written in journals and letters, remembered in the hearts of everyone who heard it. And in that remembering, Ethan and Catherine continued to inspire others to be brave, to be kind, to take chances on love even when it seems impossible. Because if a cowboy and a grieving woman could find forever love through an unsent letter, then anything was possible. The Montana sky stretched wide and endless above the ranch that bore their name, the same sky they had gazed at together for so many years. The cottonwood trees still grew in their grove, older now and weathered by time, but still standing strong. And if you visited that spot on a quiet evening, when the wind whispered through the leaves and the light turned golden, you might just feel the presence of two souls who loved each other so deeply that not even death could part them for long. That was the story of Ethan Walker and Catherine Mills Walker, a love story born from sorrow but forged in hope, a tale of the American West that proved love could conquer anything: distance, grief, time, even death itself. And as long as there were people willing to listen, willing to believe in the power of love, their story would never truly end. It would live on, generation after generation, a beacon of hope and a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of kindness and the courage to deliver a letter that needed to be read.